And the other thing that we do in Asian American studies and in Asian American theology is we really take a hybridic approach, right? That what we're trying to do is connect different cultural perspectives, racialized perspectives, indigenous perspectives to American perspectives. So we use English, but we try to incorporate different concepts like Han from Korea, or I developed an approach called Li, which is a Confucian perspective in understanding religion. And so I think that trying to use indigenous understandings rather than Western understandings are really helpful in both making Asian American theology resonate with Asian American lives, and also as being sort of a alternative to Western colonized perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's the really hard thing, because when we see the trauma that Christianity has caused with colonization and kind of coming in, and this is going to be the religion you follow, that is very, very oppressive. And so I'm kind of curious, like in ethnic studies, like how is Christianity looked at? Because I can't imagine it being favorable. Like,
I think it's both and. We recognize it as being part of the colonizing process, but it has liberating themes. You know, the African American church, you know, historically has used biblical themes. And in the same way, I think the Asian American church can reappropriate biblical themes to make it both resonant today and to be a gift to the broader church. So, you know, Fuller Amos Young said, African Americans have a theology of liberation. Latinos have a theology of the border, right? And I know Robert Chow Romero talked about the brown church. Amos Young said Asian Americans are developing a theology of exile. That because we're part of diaspora, because we've often had to come to different places, to the U.S. out of war, out of poverty, we understand what it means to be a resident alien. We understand what it means to be a citizen not of this earth. And so I really resonated with that perspective. And I think I tried to develop that thinking a lot in my memoir. So I wrote a spiritual memoir, and the idea of exile became its dominant narrative arc.
yeah, that's something that I really want to learn more about, this like theology of exile. Like, as what are some of the themes or concerns that are kind of within that theology?
Well, I could talk about my memoir, that the themes that I wrestled with a lot.
Yes.
Um, and you know, again, I'm fifth generation Asian American, so you would think I would have a sense of belonging, that I would have a sense of rootedness and home. And in some ways I do, but I think because I'm a racial minority, because I grew up Chinese in the US, the issue of identity became really, really dominant, right? And especially for young people, trying to unpack your identity and then your sense of community. Where do you belong? I think is a pretty dominant issue, especially even in America's racial hierarchy that's really white-black. So Asian Americans, Latinos, they don't fit in that binary. And so that question of identity, especially your group identity and your collective identity and your sense of community, is really a significant concern. And I think the biblical story has a lot of people caught in between, people who are traveling to new places and have different identities, people who are migrants and need to maintain an identity in the face of a colonizing empire. And so issues of identity and belonging and even sense of home are pretty prevalent in the Bible. I think it's sort of like the whole notion of heaven and being citizens of heaven. It relates to your sense of being home, secure and safe, and a sense of shalom and peace. The other part of diaspora, besides identity and belonging, is just being on a journey as pilgrims and going through your life history as then how does that apply to your sense of calling? When you're, for a racial minority, what's your calling when you're a marginalized, powerless group of people, right? How do you, for me, if my sense of calling is affecting change, how do you affect change when you're again, a minority whose status is lower, where you don't have power and you don't seek power the way the world seeks power, right? So it'd be like, do we try to adopt Trump principles? We try to become complicit with partisan, parties, or do we try to develop alternative ways? So for me, the sense of calling and how do you relate to this world as an exile is a whole different approach than just trying to adopt world's approaches of power, of dominance, and then oppression. Because what happens is, if you seek power, oppressed people just become oppressors themselves. And so we have to be healed before we could actually be God's instruments.
How has the Asian American identity and the oppression you faced and being marginalized, how has that impacted your own faith?
I think the first thing it does is it's given me a longing for something more, for something else. I live in a low-income neighborhood, and I just look around my neighborhood with so many unhoused people. There's the homeless encampments are huge, and they're trashed, and they're desolate. And so if I see that on a regular basis, and my friends are living there, so now it's raining, and the first thing I think about is how are my friends doing in the rain, right? Developing a sense of solidarity makes me just long for something more, know that this world is not our home, and that we need to be praying thy kingdom come. And so I think for me, the first thing is that the marginalized status reminds me that we need to be prayerful, we need to be hopeful, and we need to be in solidarity to have something more. I think it also connects me to scriptures, because then if you read scriptures from the eyes of the poor, you totally see it, how much scriptures speak to you, how much Jesus met people on the margins. You see how much the cause for justice are valid today as they were during the times of the prophets. And so there are a lot of ways, I think, that Jesus' preferential option for the poor, Jesus' concern for the marginalized, connects to our own sense of marginality. And it just makes me look to God as a liberator and as someone to redeem not just our personal sins, but redeem a lot of the structural sins of the world, and also how we treat the environment.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video clip from the Delgado podcast. To get more videos like this, simply subscribe here on YouTube. You can also download the full episode of each show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your favorite podcast player. Take care.